The shooting range was silent, almost reverent as Sarah Bennett stepped up to the firing line. 30 pairs of eyes tracked her every move, most of them amused, a few already bored. Her fingers, slender but steady, wrapped around the unfamiliar weight of the pistol, as whispers turned into stifled chuckles behind her. From the back of the group came a loud snort, followed by a mocking voice. "That's why we don't let professors play with real guns." The comment belonged to Chief Instructor Reynolds, his tone full of derision. He didn't have to name her directly. Everyone knew who he meant. Sarah adjusted her stance, eyes locked on the target ahead. A recruit named Matt Carson, built like a linebacker, leaned toward his buddy and murmured something about handing her a water gun instead. The two of them laughed loud enough to draw attention, but not enough to be scolded. Her cheeks burned, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Sarah was used to being underestimated, dismissed, categorized before she even opened her mouth. She could feel the judgment pressing on her shoulders, heavier than the gear she wore. Reynolds paced behind the line, stopping briefly behind her. "Hope you've brought more than a classroom lecture," he muttered, just loud enough for the nearby recruits to hear. Another round of laughter followed, more aggressive this time. Still, she didn't flinch. Her grip tightened slightly. Her breathing stayed steady. She raised the pistol, lined up the sights, and blocked them all out. They had no idea who she really was. If you were standing where she stood, if every eye around you waited for you to fail, would you walk away with your head high, or stand your ground and prove them all wrong? If you were her, what would you do? Sarah Bennett lived in a small apartment on the edge of Boston, a space that spoke more of survival than style. The walls were soft, beige, bare, except for 2 quiet landscape prints. Her furniture was simple and functional, chosen for durability rather than design. She didn't keep photographs. No frames on the nightstand, no smiling faces on the fridge. Just her alone with the silence, every object in its place. To her neighbors, she was the woman in 3C who always paid rent on time and didn't make noise. A polite hello in the hallway, a soft thank you when the mail was handed over. No one ever saw her with friends. She dressed in grays and navy blues, hair pulled back into a low knot, shoes worn down but polished. Her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived through something but chose not to speak about it. Her voice was calm in class, patient but distant. At Westbridge University, her students admired her clarity. She could explain trauma theory with uncanny precision. Some of them whispered that she talked about hostage scenarios like she had been inside them. They weren't far off. Hidden beneath a false bottom in her bedside drawer, wrapped in dark cloth, was a silver badge. FBI. She hadn't touched it in months, but she never moved it from that spot. Sometimes at night, when the wind hit the windows just right, she would open the drawer, unwrap the badge, and stare at the engraved eagle. Her thumb would trace the edges slow and steady, as if it might bring something back. Then she'd hide it again before the memories pushed too hard. No one at the university knew she checked every room for exits, that she still walked with quiet tension in her spine. Her habits were leftovers from another life, a life she had locked away along with the badge. She didn't decorate. She didn't celebrate. Holidays came and went like any other day. Her world was safe, controlled, predictable, and entirely her own. It wasn't that she didn't feel. She felt deeply, but she had learned to keep those feelings stored in compartments only to be opened in the privacy of the night. A life of order kept the chaos at bay. People had stopped asking questions. Years of soft deflection had taught them she wasn't one to share. Her colleagues called her private. No one dared to call her cold. She spent her weekends grading papers and reading books that didn't talk back. Her idea of rest was stillness. Her version of comfort was quiet. To the world, Sarah Bennett was a brilliant but reserved professor. But inside, buried deep beneath that calm surface, lived a storm that had never fully passed. A storm that had once worn a badge, held a radio, and talked people off ledges. And that storm, after years of silence, was beginning to stir again. Sarah Blackwood was a name spoken with reverence inside the bureau, not because she was the loudest or the most aggressive, but because when lives were on the line, she was the one you wanted on the phone. She didn't just negotiate, she understood. By the time she was 25, Sarah had already led 2 high-profile standoffs to peaceful resolution. She could hear panic before it exploded, sense desperation before it turned deadly. They called it instinct, but she knew it was empathy sharpened by experience. She listened, better than anyone else. Her voice stayed calm even when surrounded by chaos. Her words, chosen with surgical precision, often made the difference between surrender and bloodshed. The Bureau had invested everything in her training. She'd studied psychology, voice modulation, and threat analysis and still managed to bring something no textbook ever taught: compassion with teeth. At 28, she rewrote the FBI's negotiation playbook. Her methods were studied at Quantico. Recruits watched old footage of her calls trying to decode how she built trust with men ready to kill. They never quite got it. Because Sarah didn't fake concern. She found the humanity behind the violence and pulled it to the surface. She didn't work alone. Michael Reyes joined her team as tactical advisor during a high-risk kidnapping case in Chicago. He was sharp, fast, and confident with just enough recklessness to challenge her. Their styles clashed at first. She wanted to talk. He wanted to move. But over time, they learned to read each other without words. They spent long nights planning strategy and longer mornings debriefing every detail. Then one night, over cheap coffee and cold takeout, they stopped talking about work, and everything changed. The Bureau frowned on their relationship, but their results silenced every objection. Together, they became the model of integration between negotiation and tactical units. Lives were saved, dozens of them. She taught him patience. He taught her to see threats from angles she hadn't considered. He admired how she never lost her center even when surrounded by grief. And she trusted him, more than she had trusted anyone since joining the Bureau. Sarah wasn't just good at her job. She was redefining what it meant to lead from the front without pulling a trigger. Her instincts saved hostages that data said were already gone. Her legend grew quietly. No interviews, no medals, just the respect of those who had watched her perform miracles through a phone line. But legends carry weight, and sometimes that weight becomes a target. As her reputation rose, so did the expectations. Every success raised the bar. Every decision became more scrutinized. Michael stood beside her through most of it. He held her hand when a hostage didn't make it. He ran drills with her late at night when anxiety wouldn't let her sleep. There were whispers about a promotion, a task force, a future that might pull one of them away from the other. But they didn't talk about that. They stayed focused on the work, on the next negotiation, the next person they could save. Until Alexandria, until the bank, until the moment when a tactical decision split everything apart. Sarah had always believed in trust, in loyalty, in the quiet strength of standing by someone when it mattered most. She didn't see betrayal coming, not from him. But looking back, maybe the signs were always there, hidden beneath charm, wrapped in confidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. The fall hadn't happened yet, but the pieces were in motion, and the cost would be more than just lives. It would be her entire identity. The First National Bank of Alexandria had been under siege for 17 hours. 4 armed men, ex-military, had stormed the building and taken 27 hostages. Among them was a little girl just 6 years old, clinging to her father behind the teller desk. Sarah sat in the command trailer headset, pressed tight, speaking with the group's leader, Dennis Kovac, a former Army Ranger drowning in PTSD and a mountain of debt. He wasn't just dangerous, he was broken. But Sarah had reached him. Slowly, carefully, she found his cracks. She spoke to the man behind the weapon, not the threat in front of her, and he responded. He started asking questions. What would surrender look like? How could he protect the others? His voice, tense at first, began to soften. She signaled Michael. 1 more hour, she told him. Just give me that. I can get him out without bloodshed. Michael squeezed her hand beneath the table. 1 hour, he said, then stepped outside to take a call. What Sarah didn't know was that the call came from the assistant director. A promise, a promotion, contingent on the situation ending cleanly. Fast. While she spoke to Kovac, coaxing him toward surrender, Michael made his move. He met with the tactical commander, authorized a breach, all without telling her. 53 minutes into her promised hour, the flashbangs went off. The tactical team stormed the building. Gunfire followed. Screams echoed through the radios. Kovac panicked. He fired blindly. 2 hostages died in seconds. A third, an elderly guard, collapsed from a heart attack. Sarah heard it all. Live. Her voice still on the line when it happened. She screamed to call them off, but it was already too late. Kovac was shot dead by a sniper. The little girl survived, but 3 others didn't. The room went cold. Later, the official report told a different story. Imminent threat, erratic behavior, tactical necessity. Michael's statement backed the report. He said Kovac had become unstable, that Sarah had missed it. That emotional attachment clouded her judgment. There was no mention of the agreed hour, no record of Sarah's progress, no note of how close she had come to a peaceful end. Instead, she was painted as compromised, too involved, too emotional. The fallout was swift. She was placed on administrative leave, ordered to undergo psychological evaluation. Her clearance was suspended. When she confronted Michael in the garage beneath Hoover, he couldn't even look her in the eye. He called it a judgment call, said it was the right move under pressure. 3 weeks later, he got his promotion. 3 days after that, she submitted her resignation. Sarah Blackwood disappeared. She changed her name, moved across the country, left behind a life built on trust that had been shattered in a moment of ambition. Her name, once spoken with pride, was now buried beneath bureaucratic silence. The woman who saved lives was erased by a man who saved his career. She packed up the badge, closed the drawer, and told no one who she had once been. Sarah arrived at the Boston SWAT training facility before sunrise, dressed in plain black workout gear, with her hair tied back tight. The air was cold, but she stood still waiting as the others rolled in loud with handshakes and stories from military deployments or patrol shifts. They barely noticed her at first, but when roll call began and her name was called, the silence started. Chief Instructor Reynolds barely glanced up from the clipboard when he read her file out loud in front of everyone. Psychology professor. His tone made it sound like an accusation, and the smirk on his face drew scattered laughs. When she responded with calm confidence, it only deepened his disdain. The physical tests began immediately. The instructors barked commands while candidates sprinted through obstacle courses, climbed ropes, and carried heavy gear across uneven terrain. Sarah wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but she never stopped. Her face stayed blank, even when her muscles burned, and the instructors seemed irritated by her quiet refusal to complain. The others began to notice. Jake, the squad's golden boy with a military background and a loud pack of followers, was the first to make jokes within earshot. They called her the professor, like it was a punchline, whispering bets about how long she'd last. At night, a group chat started SWAT or not, where they posted memes mocking her, giving odds on her breakdown. The harassment wasn't just talk. One morning, someone switched the weights on her barbell. She strained her shoulder, and Reynolds only muttered something about how real-world threats don't scale down for you. No apology, no concern. The drills grew harsher. During tactical entries, Sarah was always assigned as the target. Jake seemed to enjoy slamming her to the ground harder than necessary. After one session left her winded and bruised, he leaned in and muttered that bad guys don't go easy. Rebecca Chen was the only other woman in the group younger and new to the force. She watched it all unfold with tight lips and anxious eyes. The two rarely trained together, the instructors saw to that, but in the locker room they began exchanging glances that said more than words. They were alone in this. When Rebecca tried to speak up about the treatment, she found herself suddenly on the receiving end too. The group started targeting her with the same passive-aggressive tactics, the same exclusion. A trainer told her she was too emotional after she flinched during a live round simulation. One day, a local paper published a story about a professor joining SWAT training. It didn't name Sarah directly, but the implication was clear. The article quoted anonymous sources saying the program was lowering standards. That morning, Reynolds read it aloud with a smirk, making sure everyone heard every word. She didn't flinch. She never responded. Her strength came from silence, from showing up every day and finishing every drill, no matter how badly the odds were stacked. But it wore on her. The bruises, the isolation, the constant reminder that no one here wanted her to succeed. Even so, Sarah didn't quit. Every night back in her apartment, she reviewed training materials, studied maps, memorized entry protocols. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right, that she still had something left, something worth protecting. One night, after a particularly brutal drill, she found Rebecca waiting outside the locker room. Rebecca's voice was quiet when she asked why Sarah stayed. Sarah didn't answer right away. She just stared out at the parking lot, at the dark trees beyond the fence, as if searching for something lost. She wasn't here to reclaim her past. She was here because quitting would mean agreeing with everything they believed about her, because walking away would feel like betrayal, not of them, but of the woman she used to be, the one who didn't give up, even when the whole room laughed. And still, Every day brought a new test. Reynolds adjusted drills just for her. Her name came up more often than anyone else's, always with a challenge in his tone. The pressure was constant, but she kept moving, kept breathing, kept pushing. Because Sarah Bennett had survived worse. Because Sarah Blackwood had never disappeared. She had just gone quiet. And now, in this gauntlet designed to break her, something inside her was waking up again. Not rage, not revenge, just the memory of who she really was, buried beneath all their noise. Sarah sat at the edge of her bed, still in her sweat-soaked training clothes, hands resting on her knees like she needed to hold herself in place. The form was already filled out except for the signature. Withdrawal request, voluntary resignation. Neat black letters printed across the top of the page. The training center had a policy. If a candidate chose to leave, no one questioned it. It was cleaner that way. Less paperwork. No drama. She had folded the form once, then again, and slid it into her backpack this morning. Carried it with her through another round of drills, another round of forced mistakes and sideways glances. All day she had known that when she came back, this would be the moment. The apartment was dark except for the lamp on the nightstand. She hadn't turned on the overhead light. Too harsh, too real. Her hand reached for the pen, fingers hovering. It would be easy. Sign, fold, submit, disappear. The pain wasn't physical, that she could handle. It was the slow erosion, the way they looked at her like a mistake still walking, the way she started to believe them. She looked at the drawer but didn't open it yet. Not right away. Instead, she sat with the silence, let it press in around her, let the hurt settle deeper. And then, like muscle memory, her hand moved, pulled open the drawer, moved aside the folded shirts, reached for the black cloth beneath. The silver badge felt cool in her palm, as familiar as the day she first earned it. FBI. The letters still sharp, the metal still clean. A ghost of a life not so far behind her after all. Her thumb moved slowly over the emblem. That badge had walked her into hostage zones and death threats. It had silenced rooms, saved people, marked her as someone who mattered. She closed her eyes and heard her old voice, calm, steady. The voice of the woman who talked down a gunman with one arm around a hostage and a bomb ticking 2 floors below. That woman had been silenced, not by bullets or blood, but by betrayal, by a man she trusted more than herself. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at the badge until her vision blurred. Her breath was shallow, her chest heavy. But beneath the weight, something stirred. Not rage, not pride. Something quieter. A knowing. She had been this woman once. She still was. She had carried lives in her hands and never dropped them. She had been feared, respected, envied. She set the badge on the bed beside her and picked up the withdrawal form again. Looked at the signature line. Her name. Not Blackwood. Bennett. That wasn't who they were breaking. They didn't even know her real name. She held the form for a moment longer, then slowly tore it in half. Then again. Tiny pieces scattered across the bed like confetti at a funeral. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie and stood up. Went to the sink. Washed her hands. Let the cold water pull her back into herself. That night, while the rest of the city slept, she pulled out her training manual, spread it across the kitchen table, reviewed every page of the firearms protocol, the qualification rubric, the instructor's notes. Then she dry-fired her weapon until her fingers cramped. Again, and again, and again. She didn't need to prove anything to them. Not anymore. She just had to be ready. The morning of qualification day began before the sun had fully climbed. A cold breeze scraped across the concrete training yard, carrying the scent of gun oil and anticipation. Recruits lined up in silence, their eyes flicking toward the row of folding chairs set up for the city officials. A local news crew had arrived. Camera lenses hovered like vultures, capturing every movement. A deputy mayor shook hands with Reynolds, laughing too loudly while nodding at the cluster of brass seated in front. Sarah stood at the edge of the group, her hands loose at her sides. Her weapon case rested at her feet, locked but marked with her name. She kept her gaze steady, but inside her pulse was drumming. The test was already difficult. Timed targets, reload drills, stress shooting after sprints. But this version was worse. Public. Broadcast. No room for recovery. No room for mistakes. Reynolds stepped forward, clipboard in hand, and called out the first names. Sarah's was last. She watched the others move through the course, listened to the muttered encouragements from their peers. When they stumbled, instructors gave second chances. She unlatched her case and opened it. Something felt off immediately. The grip was too slick, the slide too loose. Her fingers tested the trigger pull. Heavy, sluggish, wrong. Her breath caught, but she didn't flinch. She looked up briefly and caught Jake smirking from 2 rows down. Reynolds was staring at her, not watching, waiting. Her name was called. She stepped into the designated box. The air felt heavier here. The pressure of being watched, of being expected to fail, pressed into her skin like heat. Before she could begin, Reynolds raised his voice. One addition, a last-minute change. For her only, a decision-making component. She would be given conflicting commands mid-course and expected to prioritize on the fly. The crowd murmured. None of the others had faced this. Sarah kept her face still, but her fists clenched behind her back. She stepped forward anyway, listened to the countdown, blocked out everything else. The gun in her hand was wrong. The rules were wrong. The game was tilted from the start. And still she stayed in the box. Still she lifted her weapon. Because no matter how rigged the test was, they had underestimated one thing. She knew how to walk into fire and not blink. The whistle blew, and she moved. Sarah moved through the course like water flowing through a broken dam. The gun fought her every step, the trigger sticky and slow, but she adjusted with each round. Her breaths were timed between shots, her steps sharp, and controlled her eyes, scanning for threats no one else could see. The targets dropped one after another as the instructors called out confusing commands meant to trip her up. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She prioritized, processed, executed. By the time she fired her final shot, the course had fallen silent. The recruits were frozen. The brass in the front row had stopped clapping and started watching. Even the cameraman lowered his rig just to see better. Reynolds called time, but his voice cracked. She holstered the sabotaged weapon, stood tall, and waited. Her score popped on the screen. Perfect. Not a missed round, not a delay. No one spoke, until Sarah did. She stepped forward, removed the cap from her head, and looked directly at Reynolds. Calm, steady, said her full name loud enough for the back row to hear. Special Agent Sarah Blackwood, retired. A ripple tore through the group. Someone gasped. Someone else cursed under their breath. Michael Thompson stepped out from behind the brass with wide eyes, pale like a man seeing a ghost. He buried himself. She saw him, saw the panic, saw the disbelief. She spoke only to him now, said she remembered the garage, remembered the lie, remembered what he traded her career for. One step closer to the director's chair. He tried to speak, but she didn't let him. Just reminded him of the little girl in Alexandria, the father who never forgave, the lives lost while he signed off on a breach he called necessary. Then she turned to Reynolds, said she knew the gun was rigged, knew the change in test was never cleared by oversight, told him she could have filed a formal complaint, could have exposed him. But she didn't need to, because she had already won. The room stayed silent. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her badge, and held it for just a second. Not for them, for herself, for the woman she used to be. Then she placed it gently on the table. She said she wouldn't be rejoining the Bureau, that she had no interest in returning to a place that didn't protect its own. Instead, she'd be teaching, mentoring, training those who still believed integrity mattered. She walked away before anyone could stop her. Rebecca followed. And that was how Sarah Blackwood came back into the world. Not with a gun, not with a headline, just a voice steady enough to be heard by the people who needed it most. The lecture hall was smaller than the one she used to teach in, but the energy was different now. The students leaned forward, notebooks ready, eager to understand more than just theory. Sarah spoke softly, but her words carried weight because they came from a place none of them could see. She used real stories, never names, taught them how to listen, how to lead without raising their voice, how sometimes silence was the loudest tool they had. Outside the classroom, she ran weekend workshops for tactical units, quiet seminars focused on negotiation, de-escalation, and accountability. The room was always full. She never mentioned the Bureau by name, never told them who she had once been. But people knew, and that was enough. Rebecca now wore the badge that once sat in Sarah's drawer. Not because she needed it, but because Sarah gave it to her one evening after class with no speech, just a look. Rebecca had earned it. Under Rebecca's lead, the SWAT training program began to shift. Small changes at first, a new code of conduct, a reporting system that actually protected people. Sarah watched it happen from the sidelines, never needing to be at the front. She didn't crave the spotlight. She had already seen what it cost. She spent her mornings walking along the river and her nights reading books with the windows open. The city moved around her fast and loud, but inside her apartment there was peace. Sometimes her fingers still found the outline of where the badge used to rest in the drawer, but it no longer hurt. It felt like a chapter closed with grace. She didn't need applause, didn't need headlines. Her life now was measured by the students she taught, the officers she helped grow, the quiet ripple of doing the right thing when no one was looking. Her strength had never been about force. It had always been about choice. And in the end, the choice to walk her path alone, to stay true when everything begged her to quit, became her legacy. Not loud, not famous, but deeply hers.